Chapter 13, The Sailing of the Fleet. As that score of glowing disc ships, with our own 100 sun-swinging craft in their grip, flashed up and out of sight, our fighting ships were flashing upward, with the 300 fighting ships of the serpent-creatures racing down to meet us. Then, before we could swerve aside from their mad downward charge to pursue the attraction ships, they had met us. And in all the world about us, there was nothing for the moment but crashing and striking ships. Even as they had flashed down upon us, and we up to meet them, the invisible shafts of force from our cylinders had stabbed up and crossed their downward-reaching death beams, so that scores of their own ships had crumpled and collapsed in the instant before we met them. Scores of ours in turn driving crazily forward and sidewise, as the pale beams wiped all life from them in that same moment. As we met them, though, it seemed that our ships and theirs were all to perish alike in crashes in midair, without further need of weapons. So terrific was the impact. All about us in that moment, I glimpsed ships smashing squarely into down-rushing serpent ships, while our own craft spun and whirled as racing ships grazed along its sides. Then, hanging in the air there a scant mile above the ground, we whirled and grappled with the serpent craft in a fierce, wild struggle. Their whole aim, we knew, was to keep us occupied long enough to permit the escape of their attraction ships with our own sun-swinging craft in their grasp, while our object in turn was to brush aside these serpent ships before us and race in pursuit of the attraction ships. Charge and struggle as we might, though, in the moments following, we could not break loose from the fury of the serpent creatures' attack, who drove toward us with death beams whirling in all the mad recklessness of despair. I saw Andromedan ships all about us driving aimlessly away as those pale beams struck them, saw others destroyed by serpent ships that crashed deliberately into them, and then pouring up from beneath came the masses of the great fleet beneath, thousands of ships that raced up and around the struggling serpent ships, crumpling and destroying them with countless invisible shafts of force from their cylinders. Within another moment, the last of the enemy craft had vanished, but by that time our own ship and a 5,000 others were flashing up in pursuit of the attraction ships. Up we raced, up until the giant world was but a tiny ball beneath, hanging at the center of the great ring of suns. But then we stopped and hung motionless, for we saw, too late. About us there stretched only the far-reaching circles of flaming suns that made up the Andromeda universe, with no sign of the attraction ships or their prey. In those moments that the struggling serpent craft had held us back, the attraction ships had flashed out from this universe into the boundless gulf of space, with the 100 sun-swinging craft in their grasp, with Korus Kan himself in one of those ships. On none of our space charts were they visible, safe from our pursuit out in the void. And we knew that somewhere in that void, our sun-swinging craft and all in them were meeting their end, held in the relentless grasp of the attraction ships and destroyed by them, since the sun-swinging craft could project their own terrific forces only downward. We were too late. Silently, slowly, we slanted back down toward the great central world. As we came to rest there, among the tens of thousands of other gathered ships, I saw Din and our followers, aroused from beneath by the battle, running forward to meet me. I saw him glance about as he came toward me, inquiry in his glance, and then I shook my head. "We've lost the most powerful weapon of the whole Andromedan fleet," I told him slowly, "and we've lost too, Korus Kan." I think that in the hours that followed, while the last thousands of ships swept in from all quarters of the Andromeda universe to gather around us, it was the loss of our friend that lay heavier on the minds of both myself and the Spiken than that of the 100 sun-swinging ships. Those 100 ships, we knew, would have enabled us to wreck all the serpent universe, whereas now we must meet them ship to ship and trust to courage and fighting power alone to win for us. Yet even their loss seemed small to us beside that of the friend with whom we too had roved all the ways of our galaxy in the cruisers of the Interstellar Patrol, with whom we had dared across the void and through the serpent universe and its perils, toward this Andromeda universe. Silent though we remained, watching the thousands of long, flat ships massing about us, And it was still in silence that I received from the Andromedan leaders the knowledge that I had been chosen to command their vast fleet in its great attack, since I was familiar with the serpent-universe which we were to attack. A half-dozen hours after the raid of the serpent ships, the last of the Andromedan craft had sped in from the farthest suns of their universe, and a full 100,000 mighty ships covered the surface of the great world as far as the eye could reach, gleaming there beneath the light of the belted suns above. Long, grim, and ready they waited, their gaseous Andromedan crews alert at the controls, while before us lay in the central clearing our own long, flat flagship. In it, too, the Andromedan crew stood ready, the scant score of my own strange followers among them, its space door open and waiting for our start. Standing beside it, though, Jules and I paused. Then I turned back to where the score or more of Andromedans that were their leaders, the chiefs of their great council, stood. Tall, steady figures of strange, thick green gas they stood there. Regarding me, I knew. They had gathered all their forces to save a universe alien to themselves, to crush the serpent peoples, and had placed all those forces under the command of myself, an alien to them. The greatness of their spirit, the calm, vast magnanimity of them, struck home to me in that moment, and impulsively I reached a hand out toward them once more. Felt it grasped and gripped, as though by solid flesh by a score of gaseous arms. A moment in which, across all the differences of mind and shape, the beings of two universes gripped hands in kinship of spirit. Then I had turned from them, and with Jules was moving into our great ship, up to the pilot room, where the Spiken took his position at the controls. The space door below slammed shut, our generators throbbed suddenly, and then we were slanting smoothly upward. Before me stood a tall, square instrument bearing a bank of black keys, keys that transmitted to the ships of our vast fleet my formation and speed orders as I pressed them. I pressed one now as we shot upward, glimpsed a long rank of ships on the ground behind and beneath us, rising smoothly after us. In answer, pressed another and saw another rank rising and following, until within a few moments more, the whole of the vast fleet, 100,000 gleaming ships, had risen and was driving up and outward, with our flagship in the van. Up we moved until we were slanting up over the ring of mighty suns that encircled the great central worlds and the swarms of smaller planets. That central world vanishing behind us as we flashed on, and the great circle of suns about it, and the suns beside us, all dropping smoothly behind. Out between those great circles of suns we moved, our great fleet in a long streaming line to avoid all danger of collisions with the suns and worlds about us. I saw the Andromedans in the pilot room with me standing motionless by its windows as we flashed on past the circled suns and swarming worlds of their universe, knew that they were watching those suns and worlds drop behind as they moved out to the great struggle that would decide the fate of their universe as well as of my own. Then at last we were racing out between the last great circles of suns, out over the edge of the Andromeda universe, into the blackness and emptiness of outer space once more. Now as the great darkness of the void lay before us, I pressed the keys before me in swift succession, and at once the thousands of ships behind me leapt into a new formation, that of a colossal hollow pyramid that flashed through space with my flagship at its apex. Faster and faster our great fleet shot out into the void, the tremendous mass of ships behind me uniformly increasing their speed, until at last, at our utmost velocity, we were racing on toward the faint, wraith-like glow of the serpent-universe ahead. Outward, into the darkness and silence of the eternal void, we were flashing once more. But as I stood with Jules there in the pilot room, watching the great Andromeda universe dwindling in the darkness behind us, no exultation filled me. We had done what none in our galaxy ever before had done, had crossed the gulf and procured the aid with which we were racing to crush our enemies before they could pour down upon us. But my thoughts were not on these things, but on the friends we were leaving behind us. Somewhere out in the void from that Andromeda universe, Korus Kan had gone to his death with the sun-swinging ships, And as we sped on through the void toward the serpent-universe, it was the thought of that held our minds, rather than that of the great battle before us. Hour upon hour of swift flight was dropping behind us as we raced steadily and smoothly on, detouring far around the great heat regions and radioactive regions that we encountered, heading on toward the serpent-universe that was glowing ever broader before us. Smooth, immeasurable, and endless they seemed, those hours of swift and steady flight. But at last we became aware that they were coming to an end. The dying universe ahead, a great dim glow across all the blackness of the firmament. Ever our eyes hung upon that misty region of light as we flashed nearer and nearer to it. And ever the same doubt, the same wonder, rose and grew in our minds. Could we really crush and destroy the serpent peoples in this strange universe? What would be the outcome of the tremendous battle we must fight in it to prevent the serpent hordes from pouring across space toward our own universe? Before us now, the somber splendor of the dying universe filled the heavens, a vast mass of dead and dying suns, black and burned out stars, and suns of smoky crimson, glowing in the blackness of space like the embers of a mighty, dying fire. Around that great, dim glowing mass, we could make out the gigantic shell of flickering blue light, all but invisible, that surrounded it, the titanic and impenetrable wall of vibrations that enclosed it. In toward that wall, our vast fleet was racing, moving at slackening speed as I touched a key before me, until at last the mighty flickering barrier loomed close ahead, the single opening in it, guarded by the huge space forts on each side, lying straight before us. And as we drew within sight of that opening, we saw, hanging in space just inside it, massed solidly across it, 1,000 oval ships. "The serpent ships," I exclaimed. "They're going to hold the gate of their universe against us." Juldeen was staring at them as though puzzled. "But why only 1,000 ships?" he said. "Why haven't they massed all their great fleet there at the gate?" But I had turned, had pressed the keys before me in swift succession, and at once our tremendous fleet had slowed and smoothly halted, hanging there in space. Then, as I depressed still other keys, our vast mass of ships split smoothly into 3 separate masses. My flagship at the van of the central mass, the others moving to right and to left of us. A moment our 3 great masses of ships hung there, and then those on either side of us had flashed toward the great space forts that guarded each side of the great opening, while our own central mass, my ship at its head, drove straight in toward the great opening itself. Straight toward and into the opening raced our close-mast ships, and then the next moment it seemed that all the universe about was transformed into a single awful mass of pale beams that stabbed toward and through us from the space forts on each side and from the close-mast ships ahead. How our own ship escaped annihilation in that first moment of terrific, reeling shock, I cannot guess, since behind and about us scores of our ships were driving crazily away, their occupants annihilated by the deadly beams. Yet from all our own craft, reeling blindly as they were there in the opening, our cylinders were loosing their shafts of invisible force upon the space forts to each side and upon the serpent ships that leapt toward us from ahead. Then as those ships met ours, there in the narrow opening with the huge towering space forts at each side, there ensued a moment of battle so terrific, battle more awful in its concentrated fury than any I had ever yet experienced, that it seemed impossible that ships and living beings could fight thus and live. Terrific was the scene about us, the vast black vault of infinite outer space behind us, the far-flung, dim-glowing mass of the dying universe before us, the gigantic wall of pale blue flickering light that separated the two, the single opening in that wall, flanked by the titanic metal space forts, in which our thousands of closed-mast ships charged forward toward the onrushing serpent ships. Ships were crashing and smashing as we met them. Death beams were whirling thick from their ships, and from the huge space forts, serpent craft were crumpling and collapsing beneath our shafts of force. And still our own ships were reeling away in scores as the death beams found them. I knew that not for long could we continue this suicidal combat. since though the serpent ships before us were being swiftly wiped out, the space forts on each side still played their beams upon us with deadly effect. The other two divisions of our great fleet, dashing to attack the space forts from outside while we battled there in the opening between them, had been thrust back, I saw, from each attack by the masses of pale beams that sprang from the forts. But as the whole struggle hung thus in doubt, as our ships fell in fierce battle there, in the opening beneath the beams of the forts, I saw a score of ships among those attacking the right-hand fort drive suddenly toward that fort with all their terrific utmost speed, leaping toward it like great thunderbolts of metal. From the great castle, the death beams sprang toward that score of ships, sweeping through them and wiping all life instantly from them. But before the ships had time to swerve or reel aside from that mad onward flight, their terrific speed had carried them onward. And with a mighty, shattering collision, they had crashed straight into the great fort's side. I saw the great metal walls of the space fort buckling and collapsing beneath that awful impact. And then all the space fort had collapsed also, like a thing of paper, crushing within itself the serpent creatures and generators and death beam tubes it had held. To our left, another score of ships were leaping toward the left-hand fort in the same manner, and as they crashed into it, racing on through a storm of death beams that swept through them, the left-hand space fort too had buckled and crumpled and collapsed. At the same moment, the last of the 1,000 serpent ships before us was falling beneath our force shafts, and then the great opening lay clear before us, with neither serpent ships nor space forts now in sight. We had forced the gates of the serpent-universe. Then, our vast fleet massing together once more, we swept in through the opening, in a long column into the dying universe. A full 2,000 of our 100,000 ships we had lost in that mad attack on the great gates, but heeded that but little as we flashed now into the serpent-creatures' universe. Through the dead and dying suns we sped, holding to a close-mast formation and moving slowly and cautiously forward. At every moment I expected the great serpent fleet to burst out upon us from behind some dead or dying sun, for I knew that their allowing us to advance through their universe thus unhindered meant only that they had prepared some ambush for us. Yet as we sped in toward the center of the dying universe, there appeared no single enemy craft about us or on our space charts. A total absence of all serpent ships that began to affect our nerves as we drove ever more tensely forward. At last there appeared far ahead the majestic trio of giant crimson suns that swung at this universe's heart. And as we moved down toward these, we knew that at last the final struggle was at hand, since between those suns turned the great world that was the heart of the serpent civilization. Down toward that world we slanted smoothly, expecting every moment the uprush from it of the great serpent fleet. Yet still were we unchallenged and unattacked as we moved downward. Upon us there leapt no serpent ships. In space about us, as we sank lower and lower, were no craft other than our own. In breathless silence we watched, sinking down toward the great sphere's surface, until at last we hung at a bare 1,000 feet above that surface, the mighty city of blue force stretching from horizon to horizon beneath us. And at sight of that city there burst from us wild, stunned cries. For the mighty city was empty, lifeless, its streets deserted and bare, its vast mass of towering structures of blue vibrations without occupant of any kind. No single serpent shape moved in all that tremendous city, and I saw that upon the great clearing where the vast serpent fleet and the colossal death beam cone had rested, there was now nothing. The world beneath us, the universe about us, were a world, universe, deserted. Its vast mass of towering structures of blue vibrations was without occupants of any kind. Too late, Jewel Dean's cry came to my ears like the voice of doom. The defense of the gate was only to delay us, and the serpent races have gone. They've struck. They've massed all their hordes in their great fleet, and with their giant death beam cone have sailed out across the void to attack our universe. We're too late. Too late. The thought beat upon my brain like drum beats of horror as we stood there in utter silence. All had been in vain. Our tremendous journey, our fierce struggles, the loss of Korus Kan. Since already far across the void, the serpent hordes in their countless ships were rushing toward our universe, where their vanguard had prepared a foothold for them. They had known that we were summoning help from the Andromeda universe, had swiftly gathered and sailed on their great attack, leaving only a force at the great gate to delay us. Too late. Then suddenly resolution flamed again inside me, and I pressed swiftly the keys before me, sent our whole fleet turning and speeding outward again, out through the dying universe, away from the great trio of suns at its center, out toward the great opening in the vibration wall. Too late! No! I shouted. We'll follow them across the void toward our own universe. They could not have completed that great death beam cone yet. They've taken it with them to our own universe to complete it there. And if we can reach them and attack them before they have time to complete it, we yet may save our universe. Now our great fleet was rushing toward and through the opening in the vibration wall, out into the void of outer space once more. There we halted, massed again in our pyramidal flight formation, and then were turning slowly toward the left, toward the far, little patch of glowing light that was our universe. Then we were moving toward it, with swiftly gathering speed, faster and faster, until at our utmost velocity, we were racing through the infinite immensities of space toward it, flashing on toward the last act of the vast, cosmic drama that was rising now to its climax, rushing on through the void toward the final great battle in which the destinies of three mighty universes and all their suns and worlds and peoples were to be decided for all time.